So, hello. This time I'm talking to Lisa Williamson from IA Services, an independent arbitration service. Lisa, welcome and thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much. Good to see you again, Peter.
That's very kind. What's arbitration then? What is it? I know there was a lot of talk recently about landlords being forced to follow arbitration, but just tell me a bit more about it.
Well, I suppose landlords are forced to follow arbitration with the 3 government-appointed schemes if they've registered the deposits with one of those. But there are also alternatives such as independent adjudication services, whereby if a landlord has chosen either not to take a deposit or if it's a company let, so therefore they haven't had to register the deposit with one of the 3 government schemes, then my company will deal with disputes between landlords and tenants, which can range from anything from rent arrears to them leaving rubbish at the property to not having cleaned it to the standard required and so on. You know, general landlord-tenant disputes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that the government have been talking recently about following a pre-action protocol, but that's more really aimed at if there's any debts or if there's any rent arrears. But you cover a bit more than that, don't you?
Yes, we cover rent arrears as well. Sometimes the tenants will say that they haven't paid a certain amount of rent because the landlord hasn't carried out repairs. And so we can look at that, you know, in an unbiased and unemotional way and look at both sides of the story. And perhaps go back to the landlord and say, well, look, you know, they were actually without a boiler and without hot water for 2 weeks, so perhaps an allowance should be made, and try and, you know, just find some common grounds and, you know, and just mediate to try and avoid things getting costly and heading to court.
Yeah, I mean, when we're talking to landlords and when we're training, we always tend to say to landlords, it's absolutely critical to keep a paper trail. I'm guessing that's really important for you because with no paper trail, you're going to be scuppered, aren't you?
Yeah, totally. And when I speak at landlord events up and down the country, I'm always banging on. They're probably sick of the sound of me, but always banging on about you must have a good inventory with, you know, really important to have good quality photographs in an embedded into the inventory, ideally even to have those photographs date stamped, because you do get tenants that say that the photographs have been added at a later date and all this type of thing. So a good inventory, an interim property visit at least every 6 months, ideally every 3 months, but you know, sometimes that isn't possible or just not viable, but at least every 6 months. And then a checkout procedure with a written checkout report backed up by, again, really important to have date stamped photographs to back up the evidence for arbitration.
Yeah, and we always recommend that with an AST that the tenant initials every page. Do you do that with inventories as well?
It's not absolutely necessary these days. Going back 25 years ago, I've been in the business now for 40 years. But these days, mostly the inventories are signed electronically. So a landlord would typically email that to the tenant. So even just an acknowledgement from the tenant to say, yes, got your inventory, happy with it, thanks very much. That's absolutely fine. It doesn't have to be initialed on every page anymore. But if a landlord is old school and using the paper way of doing things, then yeah, ideally get it initialed on each page.
Nothing wrong with paper.
Nothing wrong with paper. Nothing wrong with old school.
Yeah, and I think, you know, what we're trying to stress all the time is you just got to have the proof. Of course, we've got a bit of a problem at the moment with the lockdown, etc. Have you done any adjudication during? I mean, there's got problems with the lockdown that where the landlord or whatever hasn't been able to do a proper checkout?
What we're finding is that inventory companies are doing checkouts, but without the tenants there to keep social distancing. But on the whole, that hasn't been an issue. In fact, I would say probably with the adjudications that we deal with, in about 60 to 70% of cases, the tenant has opted not to be present at the checkout.
Yeah.
So that's fine, as long as, you know, the landlord must send a copy of the checkout report to the tenant and try and arbitrate between themselves first off, to see whether they can come to an agreement. You know, even if the landlord ends up, you know, sort of bucking down a little bit and thinking, well, I've lost an extra £50, that's better than having to pay out court fees or even go to arbitration, because it just exacerbates everything and takes time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's right to say, isn't it, that you do most of your arbitration for one of the zero deposit schemes, don't you?
Yes, that's right. So we've been working as the mediation and arbitration service for Reposit, who are one of the largest nil deposit schemes. And they work pretty much in the same way as the 3 government appointed schemes. If there's a disagreement at the end of the tenancy, both parties can't agree, then the evidence is sent to us. And, you know, it is, as you mentioned earlier, Peter, it is purely, you know, evidence-based, and the tenant is innocent unless proved guilty. Even though there's nil deposit, it's for the landlord to prove that the tenant is at fault, not the other way around. So the evidence is absolutely crucial. Photographs, good clear photographs. We see a lot of inventories with either blurred photographs or very small thumbnail photographs that don't expand. And the landlord will be directing us to something on that, and we just can't see, we just can't tell from those photographs. So good quality photographs are paramount. And I would always recommend to a landlord that even if they're doing most of the process themselves, the inventory, the property visits, they're managing the property themselves and so on, if they're aware that there is going to be a problem at the end of the tenancy hasn't run particularly well, it's been acrimonious, then I would strongly advise to instruct a third-party independent inventory company to do the checkouts. They can do checkouts against the landlord's inventory, and both independent adjudication services and the 3 government schemes. I worked for one of these schemes as an adjudicator for 3 or 4 years. We will all look at an independent report with it will have more credibility than a landlord's own report. And even the landlord's agent, at the end of the day, the agent is acting on behalf of the landlord, so they're seen very much hand in hand. They're their client, they're going to act in their best interest, so they're still regarded as being biased towards the landlord.
All right, okay. Right, well, thank you very much. I think that gives a very, very useful overview of adjudication, and we'll put your contact details up at the end of this, so hopefully, you know, you'll stay safe and you'll carry on working forever. So,
thanks very much, Peter, and hopefully you'll stay safe and carry on working forever too.
Okay, thank you. Bye for now.